So yes, we know that AI can build your entire software product for you. But here's the thing. We still need someone to own the product as well as the decisions that come along with it. And that someone is you. The reality is, if you don't understand the structure underneath what you just built, you are just one bug away from being completely stuck. Every app you've ever loved, Instagram, Google, ChatGPT itself, they all share the same skeleton, the same fundamental layers that have basically existed since way before AI. And the best builders, they don't just let AI generate code. They think in terms of these layers. They understand where data should live, what should talk to what, and which pieces should never touch each other. Today, I'm going to show you the 5 layers of every modern software product, what each one does, and why understanding this structure is the difference between vibe coding a demo and building a production piece of software that actually scales. Let's get started. All right, so we are going to be covering the 5 fundamental layers every software product is built on. We'll start by talking about the front end, which is what the user sees. We'll then go one layer deeper and explore the back end. Now, this is where your application logic essentially lives. From there, we'll then talk about your database. This is the data layer. This is where your actual data lives. And then finally, we'll talk through the external services, which is really a layer that serves as a connection point to any kind of third-party APIs you might be integrating with. And as a bonus, we'll also talk about the analytics and monitoring layer. Let's get into it. Now, if you don't know me, my name is Sunny. I'm a serial founder now on my 4th startup. I'm also a former senior engineer at Bloomberg and Shopify, and currently I'm an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School where I teach tech. Listen, I've been building in software for over 15 years, well before AI, so I have made all the mistakes so you don't have to. And I'm here to help you actually get your idea out into the world. Let's get started with our first step. All right, let's get down to business. So here is how I want you to think about your software. In layers, not as one big blob of code, but as distinct layers where each one has their own job. So the very top here is our front end. This is what our users see and what they interact with. Our second layer is our backend. This is where all your application logic lives. Going one layer deeper is your database. This is where your data persists. Your fourth layer is your external services layer, which again serves as a connection point to any kind of third-party APIs you may integrate with. And then we have another layer. This is optional. This is your analytics and monitoring layer, which really is just observing and watching all the other layers. Now, why does this matter so much? Because each layer has a responsibility. And when layers start doing each other's jobs, that's when things actually break. Your front end shouldn't be writing directly to your database. Your database shouldn't be sending emails. And your back end shouldn't be trying to render specific UI elements. The best way to debug, to scale, or even just understand what you built is to think in layers. Know what lives where and know what talks to what. All right, let's break down each layer. Okay, we'll start with the front end. This is what your users actually see and interact with. Your buttons, your forms, your navigation, all of that lives in your front end. Your typical technologies you'll see in this layer are technologies like React, Svelte, Next.js, even plain HTML, CSS. If you're using Lovable like we do in our tutorials, this is what it's generating for you. The front end's job is dead simple. It's to display data and capture input. That is it. All right, so this is actually a good time to mention something I've noticed working with many builders out there. Now that it's so easy to build software, there's almost this temptation to skip straight to the visual stuff. But here is my broader take. The UI is actually the easiest part of any app to change. You know what's hard to change? Your data model, your authentication architecture, maybe the contracts between your systems. So if you are spending 80% of your time making your front end pixel perfect and 20% of your time thinking about the layers underneath it, you have got it backwards. You actually do want to spend a good amount of thinking and maybe even diagramming how your product is working under the hood. All right, let's move on to our next layer. Okay, so the next layer down, we have our backend. This is where all your application logic actually lives. Typical backend technologies you'll hear of here are technologies like Node.js, Python, Ruby on Rails, Java. And what's actually happening in this layer? It's a lot of things. Your backend is handling authentication. Who is this user? Are they logged in? What are they allowed to do? Questions like that. It's also enforcing your business logic. For example, if someone upgrades their plan, what happens? If they hit their usage limit, what do you do? It's also validating data before anything touches your database. And it's orchestrating all of these pieces. It's connecting to your database, calling external APIs, triggering emails, processing payments. The backend is basically the conductor of your entire app. Everything routes through here. So just to make this crystal clear, let's actually walk through a more concrete example. Let's say you have an upgrade plan button in your product and the user actually clicks that button. That single click will trigger your backend to do a bunch of things like check the database for their current plan, verify their identity and permissions, call your payment provider, maybe Stripe, to process the payment, update their entitlements in the database, maybe even sending them a confirmation email, and of course, potentially logging the event so that way your analytics can capture it. But what happens if your payment provider like Stripe fails? Or what happens if the database is slow? Does the user wait? If the email service is down, does that block the whole operation? All of those decisions are handled in the back-end architecture. And here's the deal. This is where most bugs live, not in your pretty front end, but in the actual glue logic that glues everything together, because this is where business rules meet reality. Okay, before we continue, I do want to just take a moment to talk about auth specifically for a second, because this trips up so many new builders. People think authentication is just the sign-in screen, create account, log in, done. But auth is actually the foundation of your entire business model. If you are building something you plan to charge for, which, by the way, you should be, auth isn't just about, is this person logged in? It's about what are they allowed to access. For example, free users, they could get basic features. Paid users could get advanced features. Enterprise customers but could potentially get custom roles and permissions. All of that logic lives in your backend. And at my current startup, LightSwitch, this is exactly what we focus on, that monetization infrastructure that is so tied to identity. And I've seen hundreds of founders try to add this later, and it is painful. You end up having to refactor your entire backend because you didn't design for entitlements from the start. So even if auth feels boring compared to building some cool features, treat it as a first-class concern from day one. All right, moving on. All right, we're now on our third layer, the database layer. Now, this is your app's memory. Without this layer, your app will not remember anything between sessions. So for example, if your user closes the browser and then opens it back up, everything is gone unless you have a database. So your typical technologies here that you'll hear of are technologies like Postgres, Supabase, which is what we use consistently for some of our previous videos, Firebase, and MongoDB. And again, this is where your data lives permanently. Now, the important thing to understand is what the database layer is actually responsible for. So its job is to store and retrieve data efficiently. That's the core function. You're not supposed to put any business logic in your database. You're not supposed to have your database be sending emails or processing payments directly. Now, some platforms like Supabase will give you both database and backend capabilities right off the shelf. So they've got the database itself plus these things called edge functions, which we've covered in previous videos, where you can actually write your application logic for. And that's great. But conceptually, you still want to think about these as separate concerns. The data storage is one thing, and the business logic that acts on that data is another. And that actually brings me to a very important point, and something that I have actually had to learn the hard way, not only in my past ventures, but also my past engineering jobs. One of the most important technical decisions that you will make when building your product is deciding how your database is structured. So this is actually known as your database schema. This includes how your tables are organized, what relationships they have with each other, and what columns actually exist. And the reason why these decisions are so important is because it's actually very hard to change this stuff later. And in particular, why this is so important in this vibe coding era that we find ourselves in is this. So when you ask Claude or Cursor to add a feature, it might scaffold a whole new table or completely change your existing database relationships without you even realizing it. And once you have real user data in production, migrations can be really painful, like really, really painful. So before you let AI just generate database code, just take 30 minutes and sketch out your data model on paper. What are your core entities? How do they relate to each other? What's the source of truth for each piece of data? That 30 minutes of thinking will save you literally weeks of refactoring later. Trust me on this one. All right, so we are now on our last core layer, external services. So this is basically anytime your app needs something it doesn't actually do itself. So for example, maybe your app connects to OpenAI's API for AI capabilities. Maybe it's connecting with Stripe for actually processing payments. Maybe it's connecting with SendGrid for emails or Twilio for text messaging. Anytime where you're making an API call to someone else's infrastructure, that is what I mean by external services, and it belongs in this layer. And honestly, in my opinion, this is where a lot of AI code gen tools really shine. If you need to add OpenAI to your app, tools like Cursor and Lovable make it super easy to scaffold those integrations. Back in the dark ages, pre-AI, connecting to different APIs was actually a common headache for many developers. But before we get carried away, I want you to think about this. Your app is only as reliable as the services it depends on. So let me ask you some questions. If OpenAI goes down, does your entire app break? If Stripe has an outage, can users still access their content, or is everything blocked? If your email service is running slow, does that hold up any other operations? These are all architectural decisions that you need to make upfront. You always want to design for failure. Always assume that external services can and will go down at some point. Things like timeouts, retries, fallback logic can all be super useful here, because ultimately we don't want to let a third-party outage take down your entire product. Now that we're on the topic of APIs, I do want to bring up a pattern that I've actually been noticing. So it seems like every few years there's a new piece of the infrastructure that becomes outsourceable. So like it used to be hosting. Everyone used to run their own servers. Then, of course, AWS came along and changed that. Then authentication became a service, then payments, now obviously AI capabilities. So here's my prediction. Over the next few years, I believe more and more of your actual application logic is going to live in external API services, not just the AI calls. I'm talking about actual business logic, routing decisions, content moderation, personalization algorithms, you name it. And what this means for us right now is we need to be really thoughtful about boundaries. What should run in our system versus what should run in someone else's? Because here's the thing. Vendor lock-in is real, and switching costs compound over time. Just something to keep in mind as you're building. All right, so quick fifth layer. Now this layer is optional, but highly recommended. Analytics and monitoring. And it's a bit different because it's not really like a separate tier like the others. It's more like something that pretty much touches all the other layers. So let's say you're logging events at the front end when users click buttons, or you're tracking API calls in the backend, or you're monitoring database performance, or you're watching error rates on your external services. These are all the kinds of things that are in this analytics and monitoring layer. It's kind of like the nervous system of your app. It's observing everything that's happening. And look, I know when you're just starting out, analytics feels like a later problem. Like, I'll add that once I have users. But here's the thing. If you don't instrument your app from day one, you are flying blind. You won't know what's working, what's breaking, what you should be building next. So very, very important recommended layer to think about. Now that we've covered all the layers, let's talk about why this all matters. So here is the big picture. AI is phenomenal at implementation. It can write the code. It can scaffold entire pieces of functionality. It can generate your components. Like, it's really good at filling the walls, the wires, the pipes. But here's the thing. It doesn't tell you how many floors your building actually needs. Because while AI can help you think through architectural decisions, ultimately you are the one who needs to own and live with those decisions. Decisions that require judgment. So when you paste a prompt into Lovable or Cursor, you are actually making architectural choices, whether you realize it or not. You're deciding where business logic lives. You're implicitly defining how your systems talk to each other. And this is actually where I see the biggest gap right now with so many builders. They can ship incredibly fast, like ridiculously fast, but what they don't know is what they actually shipped. They don't know which layers do what. So when something breaks at 2 a.m., they literally do not know where to even look. And listen, that's totally fine for a side project, but if you want to build something real, something that scales, something you can maintain, something you can eventually hand off to other developers, you need to understand the general structure of the product you are building, because debugging is way easier when you actually know the system. Scaling is way easier when your boundaries are clear, and monetization is way easier when you designed for it from the start. All right, so we are nearing the end, so let's actually recap what we've covered. So the 5 general layers of a software product. Layer 1, front end. This is what your users actually see and interact with. Layer 2, your backend, where all your business logic, your application logic lives. Your auth, your business rules, all the orchestration between systems live here. Layer 3, your database. This is where your data actually lives and persists. Layer 4, your external services, all your third-party integrations, the stuff that you're essentially not building yourself, live here. And layer 5, analytics, the observer, watching everything that is happening in your app. Every app you build, whether you generate it with AI or by hand, lives on this stack. Now, here is what I want you to do. I want you to take whatever you're building right now, or if you're not building, pick an app that you use every day and map it onto these layers. Where does the front end end and the back end begin? Where's the data stored? What are the external services that the product depends on? How does auth work? Where does that logic live? This mental exercise will make you 10 times better at understanding code bases. Drop your analysis in the comments below. I genuinely want to see how you think about all of this, because here is the broader lesson. AI can build all the parts and build it quite fast, but humans still have to be responsible for the system. That's not changing anytime soon. So if you stuck around till the end of this video, I appreciate you. I will see you on the next video.